long-awaited environmental law received royal assent in Canada this week. Bill S-5 also enshrines the right of citizens to a safe environment, things like clean air and water. Some don't think the bill goes far enough. Others see endless litigation against the federal government in its wake. David Boyd is a UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment. Thanks for being with us.
My pleasure, Amanda.
So I guess I want to start with how big a deal you think this is, how much of a change it might make in the way we operate in Canada.
Well, it's an important step in the right direction, but it's important to recognize there's already more than 150 countries around the world that have recognized their citizens' right to a healthy environment. So this isn't something new.
And does it open up the government to lawsuits? And I say this in the context of many cities in recent weeks in Canada who've dealt with forest fire smoke in their cities, which isn't something you typically think of as a risk in a big city. There it is. Is that something the government is supposed to protect us from?
Well, absolutely. And there are steps the government can and should be taking to protect Canadians from wildfires, such as better forest management and addressing the root causes of the climate crisis. But to go back to your question about litigation, I mean, the first thing to understand is what the right to a healthy environment includes, which is clean air, safe and sufficient water, healthy and sustainably produced food, non-toxic environments where Canadians can live, work, learn, and play, healthy ecosystems and biodiversity, and a safe climate. Now, the right also comes with a toolkit, which includes access to information, public participation in environmental decision-making, and access to justice. So it is likely that if the government does not fulfill its obligations to Canadians, then sometimes it will be taken to court. That's how human rights work. And
we are seeing a growing number of claims like this, right? There's big cases in the U.S. That are all tied around climate change. Is it more complicated in this country because some of these things are actually provincial jurisdiction, not federal, and yet the federal law is the one that's protecting here?
Yeah, that's an important distinction. What happened in Canada last week is recognition of the right to a healthy environment in a federal law. So it's not yet in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which would cover all provincial and municipal jurisdictions as well as the federal government. This law is limited to the federal government, and so it's not going to it's definitely not going to create a flood of litigation. And the experience of other countries is that while there are some lawsuits, there's never been a flood.
And is there likely, though, to increase the pressure in a way that will change behaviors in terms of what we're doing, how we're doing it?
Yes, the law requires the government to develop an implementation plan within 2 years. And that's really going to be critical because the devil's in the details. And Canada does need to take stronger action to protect our right to clean air, clean water, and a healthy environment.
David, it's so good to have you with us. We appreciate your time today.
Thanks very much, Amanda. Take care.
David Boyd is the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment. Time for the takeaway, and when prudence becomes problematic. Canada's largest banks were put on notice this week by the banking regulator. It wants them to set aside more capital to safeguard against a possible downturn that might turn into bad loans. The request from the regulator is a bit moot. The banks are already there, having accurately predicted the need for bigger cash reserves. The banks can look at the landscape of rising interest rates and stressed households and see that some loans are not going to pan out. But something else is going on at Canada's biggest and most profitable banks that's worth noting. Just as the regulator was asking for prudence in an area where the banks are already being cautious, Equifax reported that the way businesses are borrowing has changed. Notably, Canadian businesses have reduced their use of short-term loans from the banks and instead hugely increased their reliance on lines of credit and even credit cards. Since the rate from the bank should be one of the best, it's hard to believe that trend is happening because businesses don't want the loans, and very easy to imagine that the banks, seeing a possible recession ahead and some bad debt on their hands, are getting stingier with those loans. And that's where what looks like caution is actually potentially bad behavior. Our banks have a social license in Canada. Protected as they are from foreign competition, they have a responsibility to be thoughtful about the role they play in the economy. That can mean being careful not to get into hot water with a lot of imprudent lending. But it also means being willing to take on a little risk on businesses, even if that means it might reduce profit a bit. That's not to suggest that any third party should tell the banks how to lend or to whom, but there's nothing wrong with a reminder that they can do more to help business, and they probably should. My takeaway, Canada's banks are stable and profitable. Maybe a little more risk-taking in aid of small business is worth the trade-off of a little less profit. That's Taking Stock for this week. I'm Amanda Lang. Thanks for being with us.